welcome back to the Let's Talk AppSecOps show. I'm your host, LingRaj Patil, VP of Marketing at ArmorCode, and I have the pleasure of hosting a distinguished product security leader and VP of Supply Chain Security at Schneider Electric, Cassie. Cassie, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Raj.
All right. Yeah, it's very exciting to talk with you today, Cassie. It's been, what, 3 years now since we last met, or the first time we met. We meet quite often after that. And I remember the first time we met 3 years ago, Cassie, you were talking about supply chain security and you're talking about SBOM. This was before the SolarWinds attack happened and the world knew what the SBOM was about, right? So in my mind, you're one of those early adopters and proponents of the adoption of best practices in supply chain security. And I also see that you are actually quite literally jet set around the world. You are a very sought after expert. You are in Washington, D.C. quite often, advising the U.S. government on the best practices in this, and also with the other world organizations. So how about that? Let's start with that. And can you share what are the top 3 things that you think the audience here should know about the work that you're doing in that space?
Well, I think that those in the space, especially the application security space, already know about SolarWinds. And so the top 3 things I think most have heard about are software bill of materials, and then also the just in general, what's going on with supply chain security and their risk management. And then we have more of the provenance and what's happening out there with understanding transparency topics.
I see. All right, excellent. So since you have worked so much with the US government, can you maybe take me on how the level of focus on that has changed from 2020 when we met first to now?
Right. So it definitely has changed because I think we saw in many different kinds of events where not having the information, I think most of us lived through Log4j. And that was a very significant eye-opener, even more than SolarWinds to the US government, in that they were not aware of where it was in their environment. Where SolarWinds, it was easy to say, this application is on our system. But when you had Log4j, how do you know that that's in those systems or the different applications that you have running in your environment? You don't, because without transparency from the software publisher or the manufacturer or anyone, you're not going to know what's in those environments at all. And so with that wake-up call, they accelerated what was already a significant software transparency topic with the SBOM, which they released and sort of formalized in the May 21 Executive Order 14028. And what happened from that point on is they already had supply chain references. They had a wonderful, expansive 300+ page document on cyber supply chain risk management that people in the government had looked at, but not a lot of people outside of there unless they were selling to the government. And so they really took the time since in the last 2 years to go beyond the SBOM topic and look at that supply chain risk management. And there's been different things that have come out, including on the hardware side, there's something called Made in America. And other countries are doing that sort of focus. In India, there's work going on in regard to India for India, where they're looking at adding chip boundaries and that. But you can't do that with software because open source and different areas, you don't know who wrote the code. So how do we as software developers and people who are in application security know what's in there? So you go back to the concepts of software bill of materials and wanting to know what's in there. And that's great, but it doesn't tell you what vulnerabilities, how they've done it, how they've architected it. There's something called the software attestation form that the US government is working on. And once that releases, that is a way, if we're selling to the US government, to say, we followed secure development when we built this, but what happens if you're selling somewhere else to another country? So these kinds of things, other countries and organizations around the globe are watching and they're adopting. But it's going to take some time. But overall, what was 5 years ago where you just bought it and took it for granted, that is not the case now. People are going to want to know what libraries you're using, who has access into the platforms, where specific commercial, you might be working with commercial vendors, where are you getting chips for your device, or where is it being assembled? All of that needs to come out into the open, and that's just a very large transparency topic.
All right, yeah, very important, much needed for the industry for sure. And talking about as it is, I think supply chain was a very complex topic for organizations to implement, right? It's a very big lift.
Yes.
And now we see AI has come into the picture, right? With the GenAI capabilities, the creative powers of the software developers has increased, right? So how do you see AI impacting the supply chain security space?
Well, I think it adds a very complex layer and nuance to it. And what happens is let's say in current world and even previous world, I was able to say, I'm using this open source library. I received it from this project repository. It could be NuGet, it could be, NPM, whatever. This is where it came from. And if you have more modern technologies, you might do, you'll have the references and it'll be in your SBOM. But in general AI development, when you're using it as part of you're building a new platform or something, and you're having it generate code or something, there's actually litigation going on right now because these code generation platforms are not crediting the original source. So let's say there were 4 different open source libraries that did the same crypto function. And then the AI built its own crypto function, yet it took 25% from each of those, but it's not acknowledging that. And then it doesn't have the authority to make a derivative source. Is it verifying the licensing? So there's litigation going on about how that will be. And for that credit, is it 1% or more that somebody gets credit? You don't know because it's working so fast. And that's going to be hard. And then how do you show all of that in an SBOM? There's actually something in the 𝘖𝗫𝗏 schema for the AI bill of materials, and they're going through that piece. But it doesn't cover truly the provenance, like what is the originating location and how was it put together. So there's other activities and groups like SCITT, supply chain, or there's trust and transparency. There's just so many things going on because it's more than just the libraries or more than just the artificial intelligence.
Right. Yeah. So, but talking of crediting it, right? It also becomes important that AI should tell for the supply chain security, the supply chain that it used to create that particular software, right? So given that it is technology driven and not so much, and hopefully it knows the model that's creating it, where it got it from, do you think that is maybe an easier problem to solve because it knows the knowledge on which it has built that?
I think it will over time. But in this first sort of first level that we're at right now, being able to do that attribution, it's going to be difficult. So let's say, which we can't do right at the moment anyway, with any piece of software. If even if you had 10 libraries, you don't know the 2,000 developers that might have written it. And people don't write code from scratch. There is no such thing as a new idea.
Right.
So when you're looking at the AI sort of provenance and generation, I do think it'll get there where it has that information. But who is going to read that and digest it and be able to determine the risk? That's going to be another conversation. And that's what really a lot of application security is about. It's not just finding out what were the facts. It's what's the risk and who owns that risk. Who's going to be responsible for maintaining it?
Correct. Very important. Very important. Yeah. So Cassie, I know at Schneider, you look at the product security as well as the supply chain security, right?
Yes.
So
Yes,
if you
that's
were
right.
to look at top 3 challenges in bringing supply chain security into the product security, what would those be? And let's start this. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely there's an overlap between supply chain security and product security. I would say that generally what I'm doing now versus what I was doing before I moved fully into this role of supply chain security, there's quite a bit of overlap. So the challenges that we see are, first, transparency. When you're working with a portfolio, especially the size of the one that we have, 15,000 intelligent products, how am I going to give the transparency and the supply chain? Just for one product, while the first party suppliers for that product could be, let's say, 30, when you look at the dependencies or the upstream suppliers, it can go to be 400. And that's when I'm looking at both the device and the software libraries, right? And that could be open source and just all sorts of different participants. So as a product security challenge, generally as a development team, we focus on, I need to fix these vulnerabilities, and I need to be and I need to do normal fixes, and I want to add new features. Now, the supplier decision I made 5 years ago or 10 years ago is being questioned, or how do I maintain that? And that's a level of maintenance and operational ownership that we've not had to do as a development force in the past. Once we got the approval for the license to use that library, it was go, and that's it, and you move on. So that's a big challenge that product security is going to have. I always talk about supply chain and just this relationship with suppliers, or whatever you pick, to be a marriage. And nobody wants to go through a divorce. But now you need to anticipate, like, how am I going to manage it if this supplier goes out? What's the resilience plan? And we just didn't operate in that way when we're picking out products. Obviously, from a chip, you need to understand whether or not that there's going to be continued manufacturing. But when you're looking at a software library, you should be able to use it for a long time, right? Now you have to worry about making sure it's on the latest version to prevent vulnerabilities. So it is just such a high maintenance load for a team that when you first designed the product years ago, you did not anticipate. So I think that that's one of the strongest and most difficult challenges that product teams do. The second is that you really don't want to maintain, product that you didn't write maybe yourself. So as you're going through all of these updates, and you're looking at a large code base, thousands or millions of lines, and you need to look at updating those libraries. You don't know every decision that was made, and going into somebody else's code is difficult. So maybe that's where AI is going to provide a lot of value, is not necessarily generating, but looking and enhancing the scanning tools and the different things to say where, this is an easy way for you to replace the tech debt, or we will, interoperability, this looks like it'll be a challenge and it won't fail. So a lot of, I think that the AI usage for us to clean up code will be helpful, but until then, humans don't like to go back and do maintenance. It's just not exciting and challenging and sexy. And then the third challenge overall is when you are looking at product security, you're focused on security requirements and, how do I meet the goals and features of the customer? And supply chain sometimes is at odds with that, because you're trying to say, is this going to be the right choice? So people who are not technical, if let's say, for example, there are certain, as we know in the US government, there's certain vendors that are not allowed to be used in the products. But what if that had been the best choice for that vendor? Now you've got to look at, you're not allowed to use this, or this. And so people without a technology opinion, or, a voice, are now having a voice into decisions that from a product security or technology standpoint, people haven't had to live with in the past.
Right, right. Yeah. That's quite a bit to digest right there. I quite liked how you brought in the AI into solving some of these problems, right? You are right. I think sometimes supply chain can be a not most of the time, supply chain can be very daunting task, but something that people may not enjoy doing, right? AI could be a perfect use case for solving some of this supply chain security challenges, right? Yeah, thanks for that perspective there. So now I know talking to you, I can probably talk to you for several hours, but I'm glad that in my chat with you, I found out that you're actually writing a book on that, right? So how cool would that be to have a little Cassie's expertise in a book that I can refer to and as often as I need. So tell me a bit about that. How did the idea of that book came about? And there's quite a bit of material out there about supply chain security. Why do we need a book?
Well, first I have to thank you all because it was during the work on the Purple Book where you had asked me to work on a chapter and I offered instead, you need to do one on supply chain security. And that was pre-SolarWinds. And then when I worked with the editor that we had for the Purple Book, and I was talking to him and I said, oh, there's enough content for a book or more. He goes, you should write it. So it was the connection of the editor that we used for the Purple Book that put me in touch with O'Reilly Media. So I sent a book proposal to O'Reilly Media on software supply chain security. And it'll release at the beginning of 2024. And you can find it on Amazon, Software Supply Chain Security, and under my name, Cassie Crossley. And the reason I wrote the book is I work every week, nearly every day, with suppliers who are just starting their journey for product security, application security, and supply chain security. And these are mature organizations and startups, people of all sizes. I am so fortunate to be at a company that has a very secure, very mature security model and framework and product security group. So I've been blessed by that. And being able to bring that knowledge to others, so I was earlier because we follow the 𝗦ici 62443-4-1 secure development lifecycle standard, secure development lifecycle standard, but others may not purchase that standard, right? You have to purchase it. And it was a secure development lifecycle for industrial control systems. So it may not be as applicable to software-only applications or standard IoT. And so working with suppliers, I would originally mention Microsoft SDL, or more recently, the NIST SSDF, the Secure Software Development Framework. The problem is that doesn't cover everything. It doesn't cover supply chain. It doesn't cover vulnerability. It doesn't cover if they're building a device for manufacturing. And so, I was, even in agreements or other things, I would be referencing at least 8 to 10 different documents and different places. And it's way too much for like a CISO organization, who is a lot of who I work with, or a development manager to understand. So, so I wrote this book, and it really is, and it goes into software, firmware, and hardware. Not only if you are a CISO or security practitioner that's purchasing, you should be aware of everything going on, of what you're buying. You should not only be looking at software bill of materials. You should not only be looking at somebody's score rating on an external site to see if they have open ports that, or DNS or whatever may be that may be attacked. And so this book, there's thousands of pages that I have digested, and I've got hundreds of citations in this book. so that I can take it down to very simple terms from literally end to end, what you should be considering and where to go to for further information, for more detail, whatever you need, like looking at if you want to investigate or evaluate the development environment in your own group. Here's the information and the infrastructure security controls that you should do for your development organization. And because those all play a role. So that's why I had to write the book, because I would end up talking to suppliers for a couple hours just on everything that they had to consider when it came to supply chain security.
All right, thank you so much. I still remember that discussion that we had, knowing you, right? I'm like, you are a person that wants to share information with the broader community. When we did the original, the Purple Book community, right? There was no chapter on the software supply chain. You were the one who basically made a case for having that, and I didn't realize that that eventually led to something like this, right?
Yes.
That's very exciting, and we cheer you for that book. And just as we were speaking, one idea that I got, Cassie, I was thinking once the book is released, how about having a book reading session? Maybe we get the book, right? We get the book, we go through the chapters, and maybe we can pick some chapters, and maybe we could have a series of books, right? Maybe with the different experts talking about each one of them. Because what happens is many a times people, off late, I think people have, including me, have lost the art of actually picking up a book and reading through that, right?
Yeah.
So a summary like this might actually entice some of us to actually look at a particular chapter and learn from that.
That's great.
How about that? Are you up for it?
Yeah. And actually, one of my tech reviewers I met through the Purple Book community. So especially for the cloud security chapter.
I see. Very good. I hope to get a signed copy of that book from you, Cassie. It's been a pleasure, Cassie. Always learn something new whenever I talk to you. I know anytime I want the latest and the greatest in security supply, software supply chain security, right? I know who to talk to. So thank you very much for taking out time today. Look forward to that book and more conversations with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Raj.
All right. Okay.